Good morning, everybody, to Morning Brew here on Thursday morning. My name is Tony Morrow. Thank you for joining us. If you caught us at the very beginning there was a brief sort of technical challenge. It seems like the technical challenges just don't stop coming. But for you, I have a wonderful guest today. An interview with the Amazon interview whiz, Gayle Gallagher herself. We will get to her in just a moment. But first, let's roll the intro. Hello, everybody. My name is Tony Morrow. Welcome to Morning Brew, and welcome to Gayle Gallagher, the Amazon interview whiz. Gayle, or I should say Gigi, thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Brew.
You're welcome, Tony. Actually, I'm just thinking I might have regretted this decision. You've just put me through strange and unusual torture twice now. Twice I've had to watch that intro on coffee. That was cruel.
So true. So while, of course, this is Morning Brew and we have this wonderful steaming cup of coffee sort of percolating between us here, Gayle, in just the kind of the chat before the show, Gayle was sharing with me that while she loves coffee, she's had to walk away from it recently. And watching that bumper, this steaming cup in front of us right now is a perpetual state of torture for her because we all love coffee, don't we?
Oh, it's honestly, Tony, you don't want to have to go through what I had to go through. It was cold turkey. I think it was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do in my life, give up coffee. But yeah, so you're lucky. I'm jealous of you, Tony, and so many reasons why.
Well, let's try and pivot away from the torture itself, the wonderful steaming cup of coffee there, and let's talk about the sort of the purpose of our interview today. So, Gigi, you are you've built this identity now on LinkedIn around being the Amazon interview whiz. But for those who don't know who you are, can you give us a quick sort of 2-minute origin story as to who Gayle Gallagher is? Where did Gigi come from? And what is this Amazon interview whiz thing that you're talking about?
Okay, so origin story. So my origin story is really boring. I am just a career big tech marketer, actually. I've been in big tech pretty much since I left university, and I've been a marketer my entire career, which is 22, 23 years long, give away my age. Gigi is just a name actually that my husband coined for me. That's my married name, Gayle Gallagher. I wasn't that before, and he coined Gigi. And I'm an impatient person, so it was just easier to say my name was Gigi than more syllables. So that's fun to be Gigi. And then Gigi can do things that Gayle can't do as well. You know, it's always
Such
good to
as
kind of
what?
have somebody else to blame. I'm not sure I'm going to tell you what Gigi's from. She's got a rap sheet as long as your arm, but I can tell you there is probably a warrant for my arrest somewhere in the province of Siena in Italy.
Oh my goodness.
Don't let the Italians know where to find me. Anyway, moving on, the Amazon interview whiz. So I worked at Amazon for 5 years in marketing. I ran European marketing for Prime Video. And as part of every Amazonian's job, you have to interview. Amazon, I'm sure you know, I know you know, interviews hundreds of thousands of people every week. So to cope with that amount of volume, literally everybody has to be part of it. So even if you're not recruiting in your own team, you still get dragged in to do interviews with other teams. I did it. I loved it. I just thoroughly loved interviewing. And what can happen is you can effectively get spotted, talent spotted, if you like, and you get put onto this kind of alternative program where you become what's called a bar raiser. And you and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I was a bar raiser, which meant I was doing even more interviewing. And what I spotted in the course of doing I don't know, 3 or 4 interviews every week was that I could tell the people who had had interview coaching versus those people who hadn't had interview coaching. They were more polished. They were hard to, they didn't get rattled easily. They knew all of the kind of the inside words, which was interesting to me. And I didn't even know that thing kind of existed. I didn't know a specific Amazon interview coach existed. So I just Googled it and I discovered they exist, but man, were they pricey. And at the same time, we were having some conversations at work about diversity. And we were particularly talking about the MBA program and how the unintended consequence of an MBA program is limiting your diversity, because you've got to have a lot of money to be able to afford an MBA. And what was happening is effectively you funnel your leadership through an MBA program, which means your leadership becomes a whole bunch of people who have a lot of money, or at least wealthier. And I put those two and two together and thought, man, that's not fair. Why should only people with thousands and thousands of dollars to spare have the opportunity to get expert interview advice in a digital age where you can scale through digital content? Can't we make something that becomes much more accessible to as many people as possible? And that's where the Amazon Interview Whizz came from.
And so what makes the Amazon process so different from everything else? Because I would imagine, coming in, if you've got some kind of interview coaching in some other way, or some other kind of training, or just experience in going through various kind of interview processes, what is it about the Amazon experience or the Amazon sort of interview apparatus itself that makes it so different or unique?
So I think it's actually becoming less different and unique as other companies cotton on to the way Amazon recruits and hires, and is obviously successful, or it wouldn't be the organization it is. More and more companies are following that process, but certainly 15 years ago, it was very unusual. Like now, most companies, Amazon focuses on behavioral interview questions. So tell me about a time when, so they can get evidence of the past. Their philosophy is that the best predictor of the future is evidence from the past. I think most of us could probably get comfortable with that even in our own lives. Mm-hmm. But very specifically, Amazon has something called the 14 leadership principles. And the 14 leadership principles are effectively the DNA of the business. They're not values, as you would imagine brand values would be for other organizations. They are literally the way you are expected to work every minute of every day. And it's on those leadership principles that they seek to understand behaviors in a candidate's past, because they believe if they can see those leadership behaviors and principles in a candidate's past, then they'll demonstrate them in the future. There are some lovely descriptive paragraphs of what those leadership principles are all about. But actually, they're still relatively obtuse in terms of being able to really translate what does, let's use customer obsession, really mean in someone's everyday job. And that, I think, is the most fundamentally different thing. There are inside tricks that you know about in terms of the level of repetition that's kind of safe versus risky, how to land certain messages. And there are inside tricks which probably exist in every single organization. I'm sure if you spoke to someone who interviews at Google, they would tell you around particular things that like inside language, biases that are unconscious biases. They'll exist in any organization. They definitely exist in Amazon. But the most fundamental difference is those leadership principles. You have to really, really, really understand what they're about and be able to match your experience from the past to those leadership principles to be able to convince your interviewer that you would make a good Amazonian. So I think that's the biggest difference.
We have a great opportunity here, of course, with the Amazon Whizz on the show. And I'm just watching the chat. So for all of you watching on LinkedIn Live, YouTube, or Facebook, I have LinkedIn Live chat up here on my phone. There is a bit of a delay, about a 20 to 30 second delay between when you type it in and when I can see it. But if we can, all those who are watching, can you let us know where you're watching from, i.e. Victoria, British Columbia on the west coast of continental North America, whereas Gigi, where are you right now?
I live in somewhere called the Home Counties, which is just outside of London in the United Kingdom.
My goodness. So like as we would say here, across the pond, but many time zones away, whereas it's first thing in the morning for me, and my kids are just getting ready to go to school. You might be able to hear a lot of bang or boom behind me. Your kids will be coming home from school shortly, and we might actually hear that as we get close to the end of the interview. Warning for everyone. So let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you have any questions for Gigi, fire them in the comments now, and I'll be able to see them as they come up. And we'll have an opportunity to be able to ask Gigi perhaps what your question is, or ask Gigi your question rather, and get some insight from the Amazon interview Whizz. You mentioned earlier about this bar raiser role that you had. What is a bar raiser, and what does raising the bar mean in Amazon?
Okay, we'll start with what is a bar raiser. I'll give you the origin story of bar raisers. Way at the back at the beginning, I believe that there were some bad hires, and they were bad hires that pretty much came about from people needing to put bums on seats. I don't know if that's a phrase anywhere other than in the UK, but where effectively you've got a hole in your team, you've got lots of work to do, and you're desperate for someone to do it. And the story goes that they made a number of poor hires because driven by that desperation just to get somebody in. And as I always say, a bad hire is worse than a no hire. And Jeff decided he needed to take that human bias out of the equation in order to avoid this risk happening again. So he came up with this idea of a third party joining the interview process. And that third party needed to be somebody who had no skin in the game at all. They would have no benefit and no interest in that individual being hired or the whole staying in that team. So they could really, really bring some objectivity to the process to make sure that if a person was being hired, they were being hired for all of the right reasons. So thus was born the idea of a bar raiser. The bar raiser's responsibility is to do pretty much exactly as I have described. There's some admin responsibilities, which are very tedious, so we won't go into those. But essentially, their job is to be that third party, independent person who is part of the interview process, who makes an assessment of the candidate, their skills, their knowledge, how they perform against the bar of the leadership principles, whether they're demonstrating the behaviors that Amazon is looking for, and to guide the conversation at the very end of the process. And we can talk a little bit about how the step-by-step process works, but to guide the conversation in that final meeting where everybody gets together and reviews the evidence that they've gathered from the candidate to establish, is this candidate raising the bar? And it is the bar raiser who, unusually, I would suspect of all interview processes, it is the bar raiser who has the ultimate decision-making authority, not the hiring manager. So at the end of the day, if a bar raiser doesn't think that you raise the bar, even if the hiring manager believes you do, the bar raiser has the right of veto and can say, no, this is not the right person for Amazon.
So that's interesting, the way you talk about those different players involved. And we know that Amazon or many organizations might have different rounds of interviews. At the end, how many people are involved in your interview process, and what does that look like?
Well, it can range enormously, actually, depending on the team and depending on the level of the role. So the biggest ever kind of process that I managed as a bar raiser had 10 people involved in the interview process end to end. And that was one person on the first round, one person on the second round, 7 interviewers and hiring manager, and then myself on the final round. So that individual had to deal with 10 different people. At the other end, you can have much smaller processes, particularly if they're more junior roles. So in some cases, you might only ever deal with 4 people, where you might find the hiring manager does the first round and then you're straight to loop and you see the hiring manager, 2 individuals from the team, and then a bar raiser. So it can go from as few as 4 and all the way up to 10.
And you mentioned loop. What is loop?
Yeah, sorry, lingo. So the process in Amazon Again, it's variable depending on which team you're in, but the fundamental skeleton is there are early rounds, which are sometimes called phone screens. They're not phone screens anymore because everyone does everything on video, but they used to be phone screens. So your early rounds, round one, round two, not everyone has a round two, but early rounds. And then you get moved to the final round. The final round is when you spend a half-day chunk of time meeting a number of Amazonians, one after another, going through an individual interview with every single one of those. That process has many names, as most things in Amazon have many names, actually. It's either a loop, or it's a panel, or it's an on-site. But effectively, it's that final stage of the process where you have to do a run the gauntlet of up to, I said, 8 people interviewing you one after another. These days, it's actually quite often split across 2 days. Candidates can get the choice whether they want to split it across a couple of days or if they want to do it all in one go.
Wow, that's quite the gauntlet that you're describing. In that kind of process, I imagine there's a lot of pitfalls or mistakes that a person can sort of fall into. In your time at Amazon and in your experience and what you've seen since leaving, what would be 3 sort of maybe cliche or typical pitfalls or mistakes that any one candidate might make in that process? And how would they be able to prevent doing that?
Sure. So the number one biggest pitfall that I would warn everyone about is not having results to speak to. So Amazon, like most companies, I suspect, want to know that they're going to get ROI from you. You're going to join their business, and somehow, no matter how high or low you are in the funnel, you're going to provide incremental value to the business versus what they actually pay you in terms of your comp. Now, to be able to understand whether someone has actually delivered value to their organization, you need evidence. If you tell me you did a great job, it's like, sure, okay, of course you'd say that. Prove to me that you did a good job. Amazon is looking for that real tangible metrics to show that I actually made positive change in my organization. Now, in some job functions, that's really easy. If you're in a sales function or if you're in a marketing function, you have very, very obvious commercial metrics that you can talk to. When you're in other functions like, I don't know, recruitment or finance or brand managers or, I'm sure you can name any of others of them, there aren't necessarily obvious metrics that you could talk to in terms of your impact on the business. I'm a marketer. I could tell you how many new customers came on as a result of a campaign that I did. If I'm a finance person, what's my metric? What have I done? How can I prove that I have brought benefit to the business? Amazon needs to see those metrics. So whatever role you're applying for in Amazon, you do need to find a way to present metrics for the impact of your work. So I did this, and we went from spending 5 hours on this process to spending 3 hours on this process. I had X% incremental impact on my business. That's the type of metric that they're going to have to see. And because so many organizations aren't as metric focused as Amazon, I do find a lot of candidates rocking up without that tangible metric data to show their impact. So I launched a new product. It was great. Well, tell me, how was it great? What did you do? So that's my one. That's the one that I say to everybody: you must have metrics. You have to find a way to have metrics. The second one, then, I would say is breadth of evidence. This is a really tricky one because you get asked a lot of questions, Tony. We just talked about how many people you might actually meet. If you met 10 different people, or at least had 10 rounds of interviews, and at each of those interviews you were asked 3 questions, that's 30 examples you're going to have to come up with of amazing things that you did in your career. Well, you've got to be some kind of special if you can come up with 30 mind-blowingly brilliant examples of what you've delivered in your career history. So people do find that they have to repeat some of the examples a couple of times over. One of the risks is Amazon is looking for consistency. They want to know that over and over, day after day, month after month, year after year, you are a top performer and deliverer. So if you are talking about the same example over and over and over, you reduce the pool of evidence to convince them that you are that person. The analogy I always use is a court case. If you were going to court and you wanted to convince the judge and jury of a particular point, you'd bring along witnesses, and you bring lots of different witnesses to say to the judge and the jury, this is the situation, and please believe Gigi, she didn't do it, my lord, in Italy. Now, what you wouldn't do is you wouldn't bring the same witness back over and over and over to keep saying Gigi didn't do it, because you've already said it once. Like, it doesn't become more believable just because you say it 3 times over. And it's the same principle when it comes to presenting your tell me a time when. Mm-hmm. It's a balance between, you've got to come up with good examples, but you also want to make sure that you have a good breadth of examples. So I do give guidance that depending on how senior or junior you are, you're probably only going to want to repeat yourself once, maybe twice, if you're going into a relatively senior role. If you're going into a more junior role, you have less career history to pull from, and therefore it's a little bit more forgiving. But you do have to aim to have as much breadth as you can possibly come up with, because you want to show that consistent high performance. So that's my second one. You asked for 3, didn't you, Tony?
Magic number 3.
Inconsistency. So this is the hidden one that I was quite hot on when I was a bar raiser. You got to tell lots of stories, right? Now, sometimes those stories connect. Sometimes they're related. Sometimes you do say the same story a couple of times, and all of us have to reshape our stories so that they make sense in the context of the question that you're being asked. But the problem is, when you are speaking to so many different people and maybe telling the same story once or twice, you can forget what you told the previous person. But what happens is, everything you say, somebody is writing down and typing. And everyone gets together at the end and reads everything everybody has written. And I cannot tell you how many times in my experience doing debriefs, I was able to say, hang on a second, that number changed. This is exactly the same example. And in this example, they said this number was X. But in this example, they said that number was Y. Now, that in unto itself isn't necessarily a problem. More is the problem is, why did the number change? It's unlikely that they forgot. So what's going on here? Is that number even real? Did they make that number up, and therefore that's why it's changed? And it just creates an undertone of, I'm not sure that I can now trust everything else that's being told to me in this whole process. And the worst thing you can fall down at Amazon on their interview process is earn trust, which is a leadership principle. You will get asked about earn trust, and people will gather evidence on earn trust, but actually your behavior in interview is also evidence of earned trust. It's almost the only leadership principle that actually your interviewers use your practical experience of the interview as evidence. You don't really, you wouldn't use dive deep, which is about analysis and finding information, or deliver results, which is about actually getting stuff out the door. You can't use any of your interview process for that data, but you can use the interview process as data for earned trust. So little things like that actually have been the bell song for a number of candidates that went through my bar raising process, because you have to be able to believe the data, and 1 erroneous or 2 erroneous data points can, like ink in a glass of water, can just kind of blacken the whole thing. So that's my third one in terms of what I've seen.
So to recap that for everybody listening, so the depth of your data, in the sense that you have quantitative examples of your performance, whether it's a percentage, a grade, a number of sales, a dollar amount of impact, whatever that is, the breadth of evidence in the sense that you have a wide scope, a palette to choose from to paint this picture for them, to let the interviewer know how amazing you are. And then, of course, as any in any good interrogation, you have to get your story straight and make sure that you are consistent throughout.
It's not an interrogation.
But you need to be consistent in what you're saying and not sort of be overly creative in how you tell your story in such a way that your the details of your story start to shift and change as you're telling it, and from one person to another, things begin to shift. Because, like you say, that goes to this earning trust piece. Now, you've mentioned a couple times throughout these 14 leadership principles, and all of the sort of nuance and the details that go into Amazon interview questions, and just being mindful of time. I want to be able to address that in a moment, but for the person who's out there, and David Gibson asked this question, he says, what is the best part of working at Amazon?
Oh, that's so easy. How clever everybody else is around you. By osmosis, you get cleverer. It's amazing. They are the smartest people I've ever had the privilege of working with in my entire life.
Wow. Okay. Well, you are, as I've heard, and maybe those listening have heard this before, you are the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And if that's spending a lot of time of colleagues at Amazon, then if they're all incredibly intelligent, amazingly potent, capable people, then I'm sure that will rub off on you if you get to work at a place like Amazon. So if I'm looking to find out more about these 14 Amazon principles, to sort of understand the internal lingo and terminology, to better appreciate the landscape of the process that I'll be going through in Amazon, and just to be able to build my confidence about knowing that I'm going to be able to go through this process successfully, how do I do that? Where can I find you? And what am I looking for?
So you can find me on YouTube. I have a channel there on YouTube which does all of the things you described, Tony. I talk about the intricacies of the process. I talk about the little tips and tricks. I talk about the things to watch out for. So you can just look for the Amazon Interview Whizz on YouTube. If you're applying for Amazon and you really, really want to leave no stone unturned, I have my own Amazon Interview Whizz Academy where I go deep, 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 deep on those leadership principles so that you will understand them like you've never understood anything in your life. And I also offer a very comprehensive preparation program so that it just walks you step by step by step through how to prepare for interview. So that's where you can get all of the stuff from me. I will also say that Amazon themselves do have a very good site on their jobs portal that provides pretty comprehensive introductory information for candidates as well. So if you want to kind of go to the Amazon site and go to my YouTube page first before thinking about parting with any cash, then that's definitely what I would suggest doing.
And of course, you can find Gigi here on LinkedIn. Her contact information will be down in the comments below. We will add also links to her YouTube channel, her Amazon Interview Whizz Academy, and other ways in which you can be able to get a hold of, contact, and otherwise tap into this well of knowledge that is Gigi, the Amazon Interview Whizz. Gigi, thank you so much for joining us today here on Morning Brew. It's been amazing having you. You are just a bundle of energy and so exciting to talk to. I am looking forward to doing this again sometime in the future.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Tony. It was just an absolute delight. And anytime you want me back, I will definitely be here with my cup of tea.
With your cup of tea. There we go. Speaking of, let's roll the outro.